All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Daf Yomi Week in Review. Somewhere in the middle of Tractate Chagiga. I'm Rachel Steinerman. You're learning with My Jewish Learning, and we are joined by the inimitable Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter. Go ahead, Dasi.
Incredible. This is such a wonderful opportunity. I love coming to learn with you. I'm Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter. I'm sitting in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in my shul here. Super excited to be diving into the first week of Masachet Chagiga together. I wanted to share that so many of the insights that I think about come from my own Daf Yomi shiur. Some of you are in that class. We learn every day. And so I thank the students in the class for inspiring all of these insights. So I want to just begin. Let's start with how you felt about the introduction to this particular Masechta. It's not the most politically correct introduction. We learn immediately about the obligation to show up to the temple for the pilgrimage festivals, child in hand or on shoulders. And there's this really powerful Mishnah that everybody is supposed to come except for everybody, right? So really all the category of person that ends up being obligated to go to the temple for the pilgrimage festivals and be seen, to see and be seen, are actually men, able-bodied men, and not only just able-bodied men, but even not smelly men. Do you remember this? There was a fun detail that the dog excrement scrapers who help with tanners themselves, and also copper workers, I forgot the right word for that, they're all excluded from this obligation of being showing their face at the temple for the pilgrimage festivals. Now, I think one question we hold up throughout this entire tractate so far is it an exclusion or like a kind, you don't have to come, a kind exemption? There's this tension here between, what's going on? Is this like a cruel exclusion, and therefore it's painting our community as totally ableist and sexist and all these things? Or are we trying to limit the pilgrimage to one particular kind of person in general, and why? Why? You're welcome to put your thoughts in the chat on that question, or by the way, anything else in the chat. I'm monitoring it and can see it, so feel free to share anything in there. I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm holding up that tension. I'm not sure, but it's been really, really interesting. And let's talk about another detail from the tractate that makes this an even more interesting question. Let's see if any of you can guess. You can put it in the chat, see if you can remember from this week's daf. The obligation to show up to the temple for the pilgrimage festivals is compared to another mitzvah where Jews are obligated to show up to something. What is it? What is that other thing that it's compared to? You can put it in the chat. So you have the Re'iyah, right, showing up for the pilgrimage festival. That's compared to another time when the Jewish people are obligated to come together. What is it? Let's see it in the chat. See if you can do it. Maybe Hakao. Yes, exactly, Chaim. This obligation of the entire Jewish people to come and hear the Torah being read, right? And that one doesn't have exclusions. So this is another thing for us to think about and to consider. Why is it that the nation hearing the words of the Torah, that's not limited by women, by children? Actually, even the tiniest children are supposed to be there. But the Re'iyah, the showing up to the pilgrimage festival, that is indeed limited. So what is that about? And even in this week's daf, we see a comparison between the two, and it really highlights the differences even more between these two things. Again, really interesting questions about inclusion and exclusion. Okay, let's keep going. I can talk about this stuff forever. If you can just mute if you are not, if you're able to, just for background, that would be amazing. All right, really cool discussion. Speaking of just different kinds of abilities and how people are in the world, remember when the rabbis assumed that people who couldn't speak couldn't learn? And we saw a really interesting story about how Rebbe Yehuda Nasi noticed that there were people in his class, in his shiur, who couldn't speak, and they were sitting in the front row. He doesn't kick them out, right? And then ultimately he davens for them, however you want to interpret this, and he discovers that they know everything. They know Shas, they know Halacha, they know Agada, they know it back and forth, with a beautiful just little hint early in our Masechta about the assumptions we make regarding people and their abilities. So that was very cool. as well. There was also a very interesting discussion of, this is also on the third daf. What was the chiddush you heard in the Beit Midrash today? What was the novel ruling you heard in the Beit Midrash today? And a really interesting, long story about the novel ruling. And ultimately, there was a very angry response where you didn't hear that in the Beit Midrash today. You heard that was a long tradition from a long time ago. So it seems to be actually like an interesting tension there, also between whether or not we are coming up with innovations ourselves or something is from a long tradition at Sinai. Okay, just a reminder, any questions in the chat, comments in the chat, I would love to address them and think about them with you as well. Okay, so I'm going to continue a little bit through this particular daf. Just on the fifth daf of this week, daf Hey 5, there were difficult stories about why a person might die, right? And just, it was a little bit of echoes of Moed Katan a little bit this week, the last tractate. And there was a long daf of Agadata about this. And it was just really interesting. If you recall, remember one of the rabbis was buddies with the angel of death. That was quite interesting. And it just reminds us of how, like in Moed Katan, we begin to grapple with this question of mortality, how it is we end up dying, right? There was this question of, how could you take the wrong Miriam? Remember, he took the wrong Miriam. The agent took the wrong Miriam. And so, how could it be that you took someone before their allotted years were over? That's going to ruin everything. And there was a discussion about how that really functions in the world. And it's really just a question of how we make sense of these particular things. Okay, so that was daf 5. The discussion that we began to have a few days ago is the discussion we are still in right now. So on the pilgrimage, and by the way, we learn a couple things. When you show up to the pilgrimage festival, you can't show up empty-handed, right? You show up with an olat re'iyah, an ola offering for the pilgrimage, and you also show up with 2 other sacrifices, the Shalmei Simcha and the Shalmei Chagiga, the festival shlamim offerings. These offerings are kind of like a barbecue because you can enjoy them as well. So you show up with these 3 offerings at the temple for the pilgrimage festivals. And just FYI, I think Pepita, you put in the chat about women. Women are obligated in these other 2 sacrifices. So we're going to have to address the question as we continue through the Masechta of, okay, families seem to be coming in general, but the pilgrimage to the Temple Mount was men only. And why is that? Men and children, right? Male children. Why is that? Anybody put in the chat, why are children obligated? Anybody following that whole discussion in this first week of the daf? You can put in the chat. Why were children obligated here? There's a few different reasons. So Rob, you could say to teach them the rituals, and it's actually, that's right, to teach them the rituals, which is an adult's obligation. So the obligation of what's called chinuch, of educating a child, comes from chinuch, that's educating a child, right? That comes from this Masechta part of it, the idea that it's a rabbinic obligation for an adult who is obligated in mitzvot to train their children, who are also obligated or will be obligated in these mitzvot. And that's on women and on men. In this week's daf, we learn actually about the idea that you have to bring your child with you, ole la regel, going up on the pilgrimage. And what was a really fascinating question was, what if the child will not have to do it as an adult? Do you remember this? So like if they can't walk, or they're blind, would they have to actually go on the pilgrimage for this purpose? And there was a debate about that as well. Okay, so back to the daf. This past few days, we talk about the offerings that are brought. I actually see in the chat, Laura asked a great question. Showing up was expensive. What about the poor? That's addressed a little bit on today's daf. We begin to ask, all right, well, when you came to the temple, you had to bring shlamim offerings, 2 different kinds, and an olat re'iyah, this ola, which gets totally burned on the altar. Where do you get this money from, right? So I can't totally answer it yet, Laura, because I think it's going to unfold a little bit, but it's a discomfort, right? How was it affordable? In today's Mishnah, on today's daf, we ask a question, what if someone has like a lot of dependents and not a lot of money. Like, what's the plan? How are they going to bring enough shlamim, enough barbecue to feed and rejoice with their entire family? And there's definitely value judgments placed on meat offerings. They are definitely superior in this week, as we can see in this Gemara, over meal offerings and bird offerings, which is very interesting. Now, as an aside, there's a whole sub-discussion about Visamachta b'chagecha. You shall rejoice on your festival. What does it mean to rejoice on the festival? There was such a fun little statement on today's daf. You rejoice how you rejoice, right? It's subjective. Rejoicing is actually subjective on the festival, except for when the temple is standing. When the temple is standing, part of the rejoicing has to be associated with the shlamim offering, with this particular barbecue offering, because it's quoted in a verse that the joy of the festival is directly connected to these particular offerings. Yeah, Laura, you're absolutely right about that. Laura puts in the chat, preferring meat offerings is an old theme in Judaism, and we can ask and think about why that would be. And of course, we're not as connected as we once were to these ideas. And sometimes we have to get a little creative with what it really means. Like, what is the equivalent for us today? So actually, in this discussion of what offerings to bring, there was a little mini discussion about offering korbanot, offering sacrifices in the wilderness. Like, did the Jews offer sacrifices when they left Egypt and were traveling around in the wilderness? And there was a really funny question that was asked in the Gemara in the Talmud on page 6. What if someone says, Hare alai ola, may I bring a burnt offering, Ke'ola shehikrivu Yisrael b'midbar, like the Jews brought in the days of the desert? So what if someone makes that vow, right? So the question of the Talmud was, okay, well, what's the plan, right? That's like someone saying, may I wear the hat that the Jews wore in the wilderness? It's like, what hat? You know, like, like what happens when someone makes a vow that is totally unclear? When someone says, I vow to bring the korbanot, the same sacrifices that were brought in the wilderness, what are they talking about? And so there was a discussion about which sacrifices were brought in the wilderness, at what point the details of the sacrifices were offered, and similar topics like that. Okay, I'm pausing. Any questions? Questions, thoughts? Yeah, okay. So I just got a private message. It's uncomfortable that those who are, because of their professions, would make others feel uncomfortable from going to the temple. I just want to make sure to unpack this a little bit. So the comment I think here is about those who have smelly professions, right? Those people are excluded from going up on the pilgrimage festival. Okay, so the question maybe is, how can you exclude people because of their jobs, right? What does that even mean? And here's the fun thing. Maimonides, centuries later, actually says, no, they have to clean up their bodies and just do the best they can. If they don't smell anymore, they have to go, right, Laura? Exactly. And there's a debate in the Rishonim, the early authorities, about whether or not those kinds of categories can properly bathe, or if they are destined for smellitude forever, right? There's just a debate about that. But in theory, they could actually bathe and show up to the temple. The idea is, if they are repulsive to everybody, they really shouldn't be doing that. And Joni, I believe, I don't remember, I have to look it up, but I think it ended in a machloket, it ended in a debate about that very question. I don't recall. It's a good question. The question was, what was the decision? If the child has some sort of physical limitation, if it is solved, if it is not solved, how does that work? Okay, yeah, and Rachel, thank you for putting in the chat some articles on vegetarianism and meat. I think it's also really important to think about this in that context. Okay, so just on today's daf and yesterday's daf, there was a discussion about whether or not you can buy, I'm going to try to make this interesting. I'm not sure I can, but I'm going to do my best. If you can buy an offering that is mandatory using your proceeds from other offerings or sanctification money. So for example, if I put aside money for my maaser sheni, my tithe, and I have to bring that sanctified money to the temple to actually buy produce and eat it there, is it actually something I can use to buy my sacrifice? The answer was up in the air today. And what we end up seeing is that it can be possibly a mix as well. Okay, questions or thoughts? I'm going to breathe for a minute. There's so much on these dafs. I eat meat. Can I still be Jewish? Yes. I'm just going to go ahead and answer that question right now. Good question. Any thoughts or questions on the daf? Shammai Hillel dispute was unclear. Yeah. So are you, which one are you referring to? The one about if you can bring a mixture of sanctified money versus unsanctified money or animals? I have to remind myself. But you can put in the chat, Janine, if you want to remind me. Yeah.
Janine, I gave you unmuting powers, so you can talk.
Well, when I read it, I guess I could try to find it. It seemed like they were saying the same thing. I just couldn't parse the sentences between one you kind of, one you could, one you can, or one it's not true that you can't. I mean, I just didn't understand the
so, yeah, there were a couple. The debate, the core of the debate was, okay, if there's a mandatory offering, am I allowed to buy that offering with consecrated funds versus I have to start from scratch and buy it from unconsecrated funds? You know, it's like a little wacky of a thing to think about, but let's say you have two closets in your house, in your ancient house. One closet, you keep your coins that you've like taken all of your sanctity from your offerings and put the sanctity on the coins. And you keep that in one closet and you shut the door because these are like sanctified coins. Your obligation is to bring them to Yerushalayim and to eat food there. That's, you leave them in that closet. And your other closet has normal money from the bank, right? So the debate between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel here is, can I use my sanctity money to buy my barbecue offering for the temple? Can I do that? Or to buy my Ola offering for the temple. And there was a debate about, okay, maybe just on the first day, right? Maybe that's what it's about. Maybe on the subsequent days you can't. But that's what Shammai and Hillel are arguing about, whether or not you can buy those offerings with consecrated funds, excuse me. Okay. I saw another question in the chat. Oh yeah, Rabbi Prass. Yeah, it's hard. Sometimes, people enjoy the daf because of what's called the shakla vitaria. Shakla vitaria means the back and forth in Aramaic. And sometimes like the topic, the content is a little hard to relate to, but the intellectual like ping pong is just a delight, right? Like some people really, really enjoy that. Other people really need to find relevance in the topics in order for it to feel animating. So if you're finding today and yesterday that your eyes are like, what? Unconsecrated, chagiga, it's okay. My personal approach, and just you can take this or leave it, is to find a spiritual insight on every daf, like something I can relate to in general and bring into my day. That's what makes it meaningful to me. Okay, looking at Mary Jane, second. Yeah, exactly, Mary Jane. Yeah, they had to keep it separate for that reason. Yeah, and Aaron Boxer says something that relates to today's daf. I think they say that if you can afford to do it the right way, you must. But if you can't, you may bend the rules. I think it's interesting the way you're saying that, because I'm not sure that today's Mishnah is basically like there are different rules for different people. It's not even a bending of the rules, interestingly enough, though there's a discussion, okay, maybe you can spend a little bit less, but really the main rule remains, like the how much money you have to spend on each korban. But in general, I love that today's Mishnah gives us just a sliding scale, right? There's a different approach for different kinds of people, which is different than this week's Parsha, Ki Tisa, where we learn about the half shekel, right? Everybody gives the same. The poor can't give less, the rich can't give more, everybody gives the same. And it was really interesting to see this sliding scale situation in this week's daf as well. Okay, so Carol asks, what does the term delicate mean in terms of disqualifying someone from showing up? Well, one idea is that you had to actually wear no shoes. You weren't allowed to wear shoes on this pilgrimage. So your feet had to be able to take the hike. So it's interesting. And Carol, your question actually makes us think about what does it mean to be exempted from this? Do you think people wanted to be exempted from it? Was it not something that, people were kind of clamoring to do? And there were just more exemptions than there were inclusions? Because being delicate is actually another category of thing that comes up in the laws of mourning, for example. Like someone who's delicate can take more showers during the week of mourning. It's like a little more subjective. So it seems to be that there are lots of exemptions to this mitzvah. And Carol, that would be one of them. Oh, Janine, awesome. I didn't see the email today, but Rachel, was that your email today? Did you write it?
I don't think I didn't write it, and I'm sorry guys, I edited ahead, so I don't remember what went out this morning, but thank you, Janine.
Yeah, I think I know what you're referring to, this idea that in order to v'samachta b'chagecha, to really rejoice in your festival, there needs to be an element of sharing with the different members of society, and really enjoying each other and being together and eating together. And of course, that's something we think about a lot. I've been thinking about a lot as we're navigating COVID and figuring out what's next. What does it mean to actually rejoice together? And something we miss very much. Okay, Pepita asks a great question in the chat. What is the spiritual insight of this debate about using sanctified money, right? So let's give it a go, but I want to actually offer anybody. So there are, there are 100 people in this room, so feel free to put it in the chat, whatever you think. But what is the spiritual insight about the debate about using sanctified money? Here's what's on my mind about that. When I bring a mandatory offering to the temple, perhaps the ideal is for me to take money that is totally fresh and clean to buy that sacrifice. Because what does the word sacrifice mean? The word sacrifice means I'm sacrificing something. So I have to reach into my wallet and take unconsecrated money to the temple. Okay? So maybe that is why I have to give unconsecrated money. But on the other hand, what if my means are not so big? What if I don't have so much money? Maybe the flip side of the debate is, well, we actually sometimes can put things together, cobble together resources, even when it's not the ideal, to do the mitzvah, right? Yes, it's ideal for you to sacrifice from your unconsecrated funds, but if you can't, how can we get creative to figure out how you can do the mitzvah? So that's one possibility, but I'm sure someone in this room can think of like a brilliant insight also. So you can put it in the chat. That would be fine as well. And I would love to also see, we're in our final minutes here. Continue to ask questions, make comments in the chat. Love to see also what you've enjoyed so far about the Masechta and what you're struggling with a little bit. See what comes up there. I'm going to keep going through my notes here. Otherwise, feel free to keep asking questions. I know I talk really fast, so I get through it. Maybe if we endow something with holiness, Dita says, it's not appropriate to take that holiness away, or maybe even transfer it to another kind of holiness. So Dita's saying something great, which is, well, maybe we can't take our consecrated funds to bring them to another purpose because they're sanctified, right? Once something is sanctified, you can imagine it has this like beautiful golden glow and it just gets stuck there, right? You can't actually move it from one to the next. I like that. I like that idea. Yeah. Hope says maybe one of the spiritual takeaways is, even though we all give differently, our contributions still count and they still matter. That is a wonderful Parsha connection as well. Just the connection with what it means for everybody to contribute and be counted. Which again, I think like closing on the other end, what does it mean for everybody to contribute and be counted when certain people are excluded from certain mitzvot? Right? What does that look like? Can the community exclude a person who does not smell good, right, due to a profession from receiving an aliyah or serving as shliach tzibur? That would be from Masechet Megillah, actually, a few tractates ago. We definitely limit a person's presence. First of all, you can't daven if something smells bad. So that's one thing. You have to be 4 amot. You have to be like a proper distance away from the smell of feces. So if someone walks into shul smelling like feces, that's an issue. We have to figure that out. And it's actually really challenging figuring that out. But the question of who can serve as a prayer leader is actually limited in the halacha. It even should be someone whose voice is beautiful, someone who has no beef with anybody in the community. So I can imagine that limiting it to someone who doesn't repulse others makes sense too. Oh gosh, Rabbi Praz, I don't know. Maybe it's just it's a time for a gentle deodorant talk. And then they can serve as a shliach tzibur. Okay, great. I'm just looking at David's comment here. Is there a hierarchy of holiness so that we can use something holy at one level for something on a lower level? That's another throwback to Masachet Megillah. Everyone here is an amazing Talmud scholar. Can you take one thing that's used for a certain level of holiness and bring it down a level, or keep it on the same level? There are slightly different rules for the sacrifices because each sacrifice lives in a different category. So it's interesting. Sometimes you can't even transfer the funds from one sacrifice to the next, but you really have to literally spend it on that exact sacrifice. So they're a little bit more limiting, the laws of sacrifice. Rob, there is no halacha for over-applied cheap perfume in an elevator, but they should have a halacha about Axe body spray on the pilgrimage. Yes, that is a thing. Okay. Yeah. Alida or Aletta? Yeah, exactly. The sanctified money is marked as special. It's like setting funds aside for taxes, which is why it's so interesting that we can redirect them. Someone asked in the Daf Yomi this morning in our class, is like, wait a minute, that seems weird, like to dedicate money for a fund and then use it for a different fund. So again, it gets to that question of how goopy, how flexible can we be to allow this mitzvah to actually happen? Okay, and then, you can change the sanctification of something, but what's interesting, Saul, is that that's not actually discussed, the changing of a sanctification. It just says, go ahead and do it, which is interesting. Notice the classicism present in the Talmud that is not present in the Torah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm going to chew on that. Question, what it means, different socioeconomic. We do see differences in the Torah. We see, even in terms of Hakao, we see different kinds of professions, different kinds of people. But what does it mean that there are, there's the reality is painted in the Talmud, right? That's really happens a lot in the Gemara is, wow, okay, people are really different from each other. How do we actually fill in the blanks of this halacha and see how it works in practice?
Uriel, you want to tell us what you have in mind there? I'm clicking the ability to unmute. Uriel, have we got you?
That's okay. Yeah. But yeah, I see the debate kind of continuing in the chat here as well, which is great. I agree. This is awesome. Beautiful. So we're at 9:58. So we're going to stop here, if that's okay, Rachel.
Yep. Would you just answer one quick factual question that just came in, which is what exactly is Hakao? Is that any reading of Torah?
So it was actually discussed in the Daf, I don't remember, Daf 3 or 4. It is the commandment of bringing together all of the Jewish people to hear the reading of the Torah by the king every 7 years. That's what it's referring to. What exactly was read? That's a good question. There were a number of sections from the book of Dvarim. It's not the whole Torah, but it's like key commandments in the Torah, which is cool. Yeah. And it happened on Sukkot. Yeah.
Wonderful. Oh, okay. Thanks. Oh, Jewish Virtual Library has an article. Thank you, Rob. Okay. I think we're going to leave it there then. Thank you so much, Rabbanit Fruchter. I see that you've got your own acronym in the chat too, based on your initials. So the RADAF. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for learning with us, for your amazing questions and participation. And we'll see everybody real soon.
Awesome. Wonderful to learn with you today. Have a great day.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.